For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast, or welcome if it's your first time. I am your host Jade Black and today I'm talking about magic systems. This is something I've been thinking about extensively ever since recording the Writing Fantasy episode, and also in the episode I just recorded, as of recording this, that was the multi-genre episode where I was talking a lot about how I want to get good at fantasy. Like, genuinely I do, because it's something that I enjoy doing and I feel I have untapped potential in. So, different magic system is probably the single most important thing in fantasy. It's kind of the entire thing in most fantasy. You could argue that world building is the most important thing, and I'm going to tell you, well, magic system is probably like number 2 in world building after setting, if not number 1, so same difference. I talked before in the fantasy episode about how I have a preference for hard magic systems generally, but when I was concepting this board, I started to sort of change my mind, because I think any kind of magic system has a good place and pros and cons to it. So let's jump into that and start with the hard systems, because that's what I've generally listed as a preference. And I think the thing that I like about hard magic systems is they make sense. You can intrinsically understand, okay, this is this rule, this is that rule, which makes, understanding things a bit easier, which can, sometimes be very difficult in fantasy settings because there's a lot to learn and a lot to keep track of as a reader. But it also allows, as a writer, it allows for easier stakes. You know really how the magic system works, you know what the deal is, so if you see 100 people who are all fire mages, say, that's an oh shit moment. So that's sort of easier to control. However, what I found, and this is an issue I found in my own writing, was that because I always had hard magic systems, I found that any battles and sequences with that were very predictable. And actually, it could only really go the one way, because the magic system works like this, and there's not really any getting around that without creating a Deus Ex Machina or some bullshit. So it's quite hard to work around that if you've written yourself into a corner, which is, as a pantser, incredibly easy to do. And with hard systems, I often wonder about, people's place in society as, magic users. And, they have, if it's known that they have a particular kind or kinds of magic, then they have really, a lot of the time, a very set place to be. And while you can make some interesting character motivation out of that, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about that entire concept of, you were probably born with X gift, so therefore you really should be this thing, and it's probably the only thing you're really good at, and you know that deep down, and I don't know, there's a lot of, if that's your, entire world building, I don't like that, personally. I know a lot of writers pull this off really well. I don't think that's necessarily me. I can do that. I'm not saying I can't do that. I can absolutely do that. It's just that, would I want to do this, 5-6 times in the same world? No, not really. And yes, there's the whole fantasy standalone thing, but for me, if I'm going to go to that much effort to build an entire magic system and everything, I'm gonna want to write more than one book out of it. That's the thing for me. If I want to write a noir set in effectively fictional Chicago or something, it's like, okay, well, fictional Chicago, it's noir, off I go. Fantasy, I've got to create an entire magic system and a world and do all this and that. That's a lot more pre-work. I want more than one book out of that. But that's a me thing. So let's talk about soft magic systems, because I'm going to be honest, I kind of shat on these a bit in the writing fantasy episode, but concepting this board, I can actually see a lot of really good positives for soft magic systems that I just didn't think about at that point. So I think soft magic systems can allow for a lot of character creativity, and that can be, in character building, but I also think the characters themselves potentially have a lot of creativity open to them, and I really, really like that as an idea, because you don't necessarily have that in the same way in a hard magic system where you know certain things synergize and certain things don't and all that. If it's a soft magic system and no one's really quite sure, there can be some really interesting results that come of that. I think also the world interaction with magic is an interesting unknown. You don't know how certain types of magic will affect certain things necessarily, especially in a soft magic system. Things are much more likely to have never been done. So there's a lot more freedom and there's a lot of interesting stuff you can play with there. The cons of soft magic systems, I very much went for this in the writing fantasy episode, is it doesn't necessarily make sense. It's a lot harder to understand. There are, in a sense, a lot more rules or no rules, and that can be very difficult to get a hold of. And maybe the point is that you don't, and I just read it wrong. I'm willing to admit that. The other thing I would say is that soft magic systems can read like a Deus Ex Machina, potentially. Particularly if you're talking about stuff that's like, I don't know, shall we try this? And it works perfectly. You can very, very easily end up in that territory, and that's uncomfy, shall we say. Other things I talked about in the writing fantasy episode was passive versus active magic systems. And this I don't think reads into soft and hard. I think this is an entirely separate facet of magic systems. And I talked a lot about passive systems and how much I enjoyed writing this, and I want to talk about exactly why I liked this. And the number one thing I loved about the passive magic system I had in Candidate 66 was the unpredictability of it. You just don't know when things are going to activate or not. And maybe this is partly a soft magic system thing as well. A lot of the magic in Candidate 66 was reactionary or location-based, but very secretive locations, so there's a lot of unpredictability there, and if things sort of happen because certain things happen and it's not very well documented, there's a lot of just unknown stakes there about, okay, but I know that this guy has this thing which sometimes makes fire just, do things, completely unpredictably. And that could happen at literally any time, and there's no control over that. So there's an inherent amount of higher stakes there. I think that's really interesting. And you also get world interaction here as well, because you don't know, is the world itself semi-sentient and controlling this? You could go that direction with it. Or, if, a few things end up activating at once, what does that mean in terms of, how the world interacts with the magic? It's not necessarily as well documented. There's a lot that can be done there. Again, though, with passive magic systems, it can read like a soft system where it doesn't necessarily make sense. And it can sometimes read as a Deus Ex Machina as well, if it's, oh, but suddenly because, passive, suddenly this happens, and it's like, well, yeah, it's a passive system, but that's convenient, isn't it? And I think that in a passive magic system in particular, I think is very hard to balance. Now, active systems is what you see a lot more of the time, and this is something I did dabble with, and I'm gonna be honest, I did not enjoy this. I mean, again, like a hard system, it does create for easier stakes, because you know exactly what powers people have, and exactly what that looks like. It can allow for character creativity as well, about, okay, well, I might, look a bit, younger, undertrained or whatnot, so I can sort of lull people, or I can do this thing as well. I don't know. There's a lot of character creativity potential with, blending castings and all those sorts of things. The main issues I have with active magic systems, I did touch on this very much again in the Writing Fantasy episode, is pacing. If you're going to be talking about a whole load of people chucking spells around and casting spells, how do you deal with that? Do you write lots and lots of description and how exactly it works and all that? Because if so, I'm going to fall asleep. I'm not interested. Keeping pacing going throughout that is difficult, and how much is necessary to be written about that can sometimes be a very hard judgment call, particularly in certain scenarios. It's not easy, and it's very easy to get the pacing wrong there. And yes, I know a lot of people like pages and pages of description. I don't. You're wrong. Sorry. I'm going to piss some people off with this episode with that, but I will. The other thing I really don't like about active magic systems, and I think this one is almost impossible to work around, is surely just the number of people you have means you win. If you've got 100 fire mages versus, 3 water mages, yes, water might be, very effective against the fire, but you're talking about 100 people versus 3. You're really going to tell me that in an active system, with 100 people that can just do a whole load of things, at once, yeah, I'm going to have a hard time believing that 3 people can win there. I think the classic fantasy formula has always been that the higher stakes there are, the harder the magic system is. So you see a lot of big epic fantasies with elemental magic and all this sort of thing, and a lot of cozy fantasy seems to have a lot softer systems. That seems to be how it goes. And yeah, that's fair, it works. But I think soft and passive systems, because of the innate creativity, and particularly passive systems and how unpredictable they can be, I think that can inherently have a lot higher stakes, a lot more uncertainty to it. I think soft and passive systems can work really well for that. And in an epic conflict, that could be really interesting and fun to play with, too. Let's talk about a couple of other magic systems as well. And this is, like, what you see in the vast majority of fantasy. I would say 80 to 90+% of fantasy I've ever seen is elemental magic. And, you have the standard for, earth, wind, water, fire, or whatever. And, some people add a lot to this. I mean, the classic Square Enix one is you have mute and gravity and holy and all of these things. And regardless, I think it's really hard to, at this point, to do elemental magic without it being a rehash or without it being, in my eyes, boring. Now, a lot of this, I can get why people love it and still do and still want to write it, because again, it is easier to write this than to come up with an entirely new system. It is. And it can, I guess, feel like, putting an old pair of slippers on. It's just, oh yeah, it's this, it's familiar, it's nice. I like that. And I respect that. I do. But like I said, it's really, at this point, especially if you're just talking about the standard 4 plus, maybe lightning or whatever, it has been done to death. And it's really hard to take a completely unique direction with that, I think. And you also get into a bit of the video game problem here. And I talked about this in the Writing Fantasy episode as well, is, if you have a video game where you're talking about, there's the warrior, there's the rogue, there's the mage sort of thing, dungeon crawler RPG type thing. I play as the warrior type, the one with the big sword who hits things, because I don't want to learn really complicated magic systems and the ins and outs of it. I don't want to. I don't have time. I'm not interested in that. And it's actually a big mistake that I would say the Horizon series has made. In Horizon Zero Dawn, you have a very simple system. You've got fire, you've got ice, and you've got electricity, I think. You might not even have that. But, you can hit people with fire. No, you do, because you have the Stormbreaker. You have, these 3 things that you can hit enemies with. You can set them on fire and cause some damage. You can freeze them and make them more vulnerable to melee damage, I think it is. Or you can, hit them with a whole load of lightning energy and stun them. That's cool, okay? That's simple, that's cool, I can get behind that. I mean, not that that's magic in Horizon, but, it's... For this scenario, for intents and purposes, it's pretty much the same thing. With Forbidden West, they then added poison and... I mean, they have a key for all the different symbols and what they mean. And, they had a piercing damage symbol in Zero Dawn as well. Not that, it was like tear or something like that for, like, ripping components off machines. It was like a key of 5, 6 different icons, maybe. In Forbidden West, it's huge. Like, it's probably like 20 odd icons or something, and my dude, I am not keeping track of all that. I'm not going to be using all of this to the fullest potential. Like, not a chance. While trying to keep track of plots and side quests and battle strategies and different weapons, like, I'm sorry, mate. Even if I wanted to, keep track, even if I wanted to, I wouldn't be able to without sinking a lot of hours into it, especially in, video games are terrible for this, generally speaking. They dump all of this on you pretty much at once, because they assume you've played the first game. They assume you know how the first, 4 or 5 work. Bad practice as a game designer, by the way. But, then they dump, oh yeah, and there's poison, there's this and there's that, and they dump another 5 on you straight after the tutorial. I'm like, whoa, that's 10. Just straight up, and, plus, a whole load of different weapons and gear and everything, and world building and everything you told me about. That's a lot. Just, like, calm down a minute there, okay? And I think you can pull this off if you've got a massive epic series where, you're talking about, I don't know, someone like Corey Valley who's got like 9 300k books in his series or something, unfathomable to me like that. Yeah, he can have this huge complicated magic system all he wants because he's got millions of words to cover it in. And, if it's drip-fed properly over time, yeah, you can follow it. If you're talking about, standalone, if you're talking about something like, dungeon crawler RPG video game, you just can't do that, and it's incredibly difficult to pull off. And if you bring certain things into it too late as well, it can again read like a Deus Ex Machina or like it's bullshit, and like, oh yeah, this is really powerful type of magic, by the way, and we're delving into this in book 6 out of 7, or, there's a prophecy, by the way, that's being revealed in book 5 out of 7. Really? You didn't think this was worth bringing up before now? And, yeah, if you're smart about it, you can sort of allude to it earlier and oh wait, hang on, how did somebody do this thing? And then you get an explanation for it later, sure, but again, it's very difficult to do well, and it's difficult to do it in a way that hasn't been overdone. Now, another one you see, and I think this is somewhat fueled by D&D, is resource-based magic. So what I mean by that is there's one book I've seen in a few pitch contests that I think has gone on to publication now. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, but it caught my attention at the time because it had spice-based magic. So it's a lot of spices, a lot of cooking, it had a lot of Indian influence, I believe. If you know the name of the book, then let me know, because it's bugging me now. But I thought about this and thought, oh, that's a cool dynamic. That's actually, really neat. And, combining different spices in dishes and things like that. And then I thought about, the reality of that. If you need, say, cardamom to do something. Well, I mean, who needs cardamom anyway? It's disgusting, but, I digress. The reality of that situation is anybody who is aware of magic and has any amount of wealth or power will just hoard. They will hoard all these resources and, close off access and all of these things and buy up farms, and so then the knowledge of magic somewhat dies. And also, if someone has that much magical power at their disposal, what do you do about that? And the good stories surrounding those sorts of resource-based problems will explore that and get into that. But still, it makes it difficult to pull off without getting into lots of trade and politics and negotiations. And yes, some people really like that. I really like that. But generally speaking, fantasy readers don't seem to. I mean, it's probably the biggest complaint of the Star Wars prequels that, it opens on tax negotiations, spends so much time on politics, and, most people seem to despise that. And the other one I've seen that isn't on the board here is sort of personality trait-based magic systems. And if you're an INTJ, you have this, type of magic. If you're impulsive, you have this type of magic. And I've seen this played out a lot with things like disability. So, if you're, say, if you have a certain disability, you have this type of magic, and it can be used as sort of disability empowerment, I guess. But again, it very much plays into, okay, well, you exist to have this certain role. Uncomfortable. And there's no escaping that, necessarily, in something like a magic system where everyone can see, oh yeah, you cast fire, so, you're that sort of person, huh? And I don't like that. Again, it reads as an inherent deus ex machina, and it also it can get in the way of character development and the whole idea that people can change. Again, good literature will explore this and do it well, and it will be incredibly difficult, but a lot of it is not comfortable. There are a lot of different types of magic systems, a lot of ways you can combine things, and a lot of ways you can handle it well or not. In terms of what I would do if and when I am to pick up fantasy again. Because it is something I really genuinely would like to be good at. It is. I can't see myself doing elemental, result-based, personality-based magic. I don't like it. I don't take an interest in it. I almost definitely would do a passive system because I think that's interesting. I think not enough people play with it. I think there's a lot of potential with it. As for hard and soft systems, I'm right now undecided. Because I think my brain defaults to it being a hard system. My brain defaults to wanting to make something that critical to the plot have some kind of rule that I can keep track of. It wants to do that. So like a hard passive system would be easier for me. But I think, in a sense, I like the idea of soft passive a lot more, because there's so much creativity and world interaction unknowns there. I really like that. I think there's a lot of potential with that, and that's probably the way I'm leaning at the moment. I'm just not convinced I could pull it off, basically, but as I've said before, and I'll say it again, at the end of the day, it comes down to practice, and I just need to put in the time with that. I got other things to do first. And if you want to be up to date on the things I'm doing first, on, semi-live updates with my writing, Twitter's the place to find me. That's JadeBlack21. If you're looking for the home of the podcast, which you probably are if you're here, that is Instagram. That's Jade_Black21 on there. You'll get advance notice of what the episode for the week is. You'll also get soundbite teaser reels and other things as and when I experiment with them. If you are published or on the way, please do get in touch. I am jade42black@gmail.com. There's no genre requirement. If you want to come on and talk loads about your magic system, that would be interesting, again, to hear how different people handle that. If you want to do that, across a novel, a novella, an entire trilogy, do an overview episode, all of those things are cool. There's no genre restriction, there's no age category restriction, none of that. The only thing I would say is read the description first, include that in your initial contact. There's a list of things I want to know. It's really handy for everybody. And also, if you're indie and self-pub, you're the people I want to hear from. And that's about all I have for now. So until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel a lot. Intro and outro music by me. Copyright JBlack 2024.